there. Welcome to the Experience Ship podcast. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Dan Lee.
And we have a fun story today.
So recently, Brittany and I have been talking about some people in our life that really matter a lot and have lived through some incredible experiences and times. And one of those people that really stands out to us that we talk frequently about is my peepaw, Bill Parr. I've been really interested in talking with my peepaw about his life and things that he's gone through and seen in his almost 97 years of existence. So I asked him if I could interview him, and he was really excited. So leading up to that, my dad delivered some letters to me written by my peepaw to my meemaw when he was drafted in the Army, and he was stationed at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. Their letters are really intimate. They really miss each other. This interview is very personal for me, and I think a lot of people will really love hearing about the life of Bill Parr. I'm excited to share it with you all, and I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. This is Dan Lee, and I'm here with my peepaw, Bill Parr. Hi, peepaw.
Hi, Sugar.
Can you say your whole name?
William Parr, Jr.
And when were you born?
1927, August the 21st.
Awesome. And so today we're here to talk about my peepaw and his life and his experiences in his life. I have a list of topics, but we're just going to talk and get to know peepaw and some of his history and some of the experiences that he's lived through. So peepaw, I was kind of hoping we could start with your childhood.
My childhood. My mother and father did not get along very well, and they stayed together probably till I was 6 or 7, and they divorced, and I was pretty well raised after that in foster homes.
Where was that?
In Dallas, Texas. And in foster homes, you generally moved every 6 months. So I would imagine I went to around 20 schools in Dallas.
Wow.
By the time I finished.
That's a lot.
I had a sister 14 months younger than I. Her name was Bobby.
Okay. That's a cute name.
Yeah,
though.
Bobby and Billy.
I like that. That's really sweet. And
actually, it was Billy and Bobby.
Billy and Bobby. Were y'all in foster homes together?
Yes, we were in foster homes together, and until I guess when she was about 14, she began to be a little problem for the home, and they put her in a Catholic convent.
Wow.
And later she became a nun.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. In Dallas.
In Dallas, and then moved to Syracuse, New York, and got her education there as a Catholic nun, and taught school.
Wow.
In the Catholic school, of course.
So were y'all friends or close?
Always. We were very close because a lot of times we just felt like we were all we had.
Yeah.
The foster homes are good, but generally it's a lady making a little extra money. And the husband was seldom involved in it. So I never really got to be around men much to know what men did or what. And, but they were all good. We never were abused. It wasn't anything like going on now.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you had enough to eat and you had the resources?
Always had enough to eat. They always took good care of us.
Yeah, that's good. Can you tell a little bit about your parents?
My father was one of the smartest guys I ever knew in so many ways. He could do anything. When I was born, on my birth certificate, it has that he was an iceman. He delivered ice on a horse-drawn wagon.
Wow.
And then I remember at a very early age that I just get snapshots. When I was 3 or 4, he was carrying in a horse-drawn dairy, carrying milk, house to house. All this stuff used to be delivered.
Where was this at?
In all of it in Dallas. I grew up in Dallas. I was in Dallas till I was grown.
Do you know what year your father was born?
My father was born in 1906.
1906. And what was his full name?
Harold William Parr, Sr.
And you're Harold William Parr.
And I'm Junior.
Okay.
And my mother's name was Edna Mae Norton, and of course became Parr.
Yeah. And where is she from?
She grew up pretty well in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was born in Waco, but pretty well grew up in Dallas.
Yeah.
My grandmother ran a potato chip factory in Oak Cliff in Dallas that was owned by her brother. And my grandfather, he would sell out, doing a little gardening for people.
Yeah.
That's about all he ever did.
Yeah. So the marriage certificate that I was just looking at, it said in France. That was your grandparents?
No, that was my mother and my stepfather.
Oh, I see.
My mother was a WAC, which means Women Army Corps, which literally they were early in the Army, but it was the women's part of it. She was a good driver, and so she worked in the carpool and was used to drive officers around in England, and later when France was liberated, well, she was stationed in France and generally drove officers around as they were needed.
Okay. And so she met your stepfather when?
No, they had known each other after they divorced. I can remember my stepfather who would become my stepfather. I had appendicitis when I was 9, and he took me to the hospital.
Yeah.
And so they had been semi together all that time, but they never married.
Okay.
Until France.
So appendicitis was before they got married.
Oh yeah, I was 9 years old. That was 1936.
Okay. So at some point when you were in foster care, at some point this man came into your life, and that was maybe one of the first male figures that you had as a child?
Well, he wasn't around. He wasn't around that much. Wasn't around me that much.
Okay. Your mom is in the Army, and that marriage certificate said France, so they married over there.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there was a letter from the mayor.
The mayor happened to attend their wedding ceremony. I do not know why. I don't know the facts of that, but I know he did because he wrote a congratulatory.
The mayor of Paris?
Marriage.
It was in Paris, right?
In Paris, France.
Wow. That's so cool.
It really is.
That's neat. That document, it's interesting to look at. It's neat that you still have it. So tell me about Jack, because he was a lifelong friend, but early in childhood is when you
I lived at a foster home in Dallas on Junius Avenue. And when I was 11, a family moved in three doors down from us, and they had a son, Jack. In fact, it was a broken home again. A mother came with her son and daughter, and Jack was 2.5 years older than I, but we became fast friends, and were fast friends all through life. In fact, I think it was about 2006 when he died.
Yeah, and you were in Texas at that time, not in Dallas, but in Canton, Texas.
I was in Canton, Texas when he died, but he lived in Dallas.
He was still in Dallas, and you got to visit with him.
I got to visit with him often. We were together often, but when he got
mesothelioma,
he got that. He had worked on a lot of projects, and a lot of them had a lot of asbestos.
Oh yeah,
and so he got that disease. Called me one day and said, "Billy, I've got this disease, and I've got about 5 to 6 months, the doctor says, to live." And so I said, "Jack, I'll be right up there." And so my wife and I got in the car and went up there and visited with him. And during that visit, we led him to a relationship with Jesus. And he gave his life to Jesus. And so I told him I was going to be in heaven. I wanted him there.
You're going to see him there.
We had a lifetime of friendship. I wanted an eternal time of friendship.
Yeah.
And so he gladly received Christ, and I baptized him the next Sunday.
And his daughter.
And his daughter. His daughter she said, "I want to do that too."
Wow. And that's in Little Hope Baptist Church.
The Little Hope Baptist Church right outside of Canton, Texas.
Where you were the pastor.
Yes, I was pastor there. After my third retirement, I was there for 14 years.
Kind of full circle there, like a young friend from very early in life. And then here you are in the later stages of your life, and pastor, your last pastor role in a church, and you got to baptize him and his daughter.
Right. It was one of the thrills of my life.
That's amazing. So what was Jack's full name?
Belden Gervis Robertson, Jr.
Belden
Belden Gervis
Gervis.
Robertson.
That's a name.
And my oldest son, I named him James Belden Parr after him.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really special.
Yeah, his middle name is Belden.
So you have two sons. One is my dad, Dan Parr.
That's it.
And he's 16 years younger than your firstborn.
Right.
James. I know him as Uncle Jim. So if we backtrack to your younger life, I want to know about when you became a father, when you got married, things like that. But tell me how the chronological order of this, because at some point you joined the Merchant Marines. Was that first?
Yes. When I was 16 and a half, so I got my father to sign for me. My father was in the Army at the time. He'd been drafted. He was in the Army, but he happened to be home on leave. So I got him to sign for me. So I went to a training at St. Petersburg, Florida, and learned engine work, and then went to sea as a fireman. A fireman doesn't put out fires on a ship. He makes the engines go.
Oh.
He keeps the fire burning for the boilers.
Wow.
To keep the water boiling, and so the engine will go.
Different term for firemen.
Yeah. So I did that for, I guess, a year and a half off and on.
It sounds like really hard work.
No, you just stand there and look at gauges and maybe turn the dial.
Oh. Well, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was diesel fed.
Yeah.
So if it needed more, you just put a little more diesel. If it got too much, you turned it down and kept the water constant. It was, you just had to keep your eye on the gauges. Took constant watch, but it wasn't hard.
Was it long hours of watch?
No, on the ship you work 4 and then you're off 8.
Oh.
Work 4, off 8.
So what'd you do in your off 8?
Sleep.
Really?
I know you'd work 4 hours, but you're on your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then just seemed like you'd go up and go to bed.
Yeah. So what was life like on the ship? How long at a time were you on the ship?
Oh, I was on a ship, on 2 different ships. The first one was the USAT Maryland. USAT is a troop transport. They both were troop transports. We went to New Orleans, to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and during both trips, I was on later the USAT Florida. It was a larger troop transport. But we went to Panama and Venezuela, Curacao, Aruba, Cuba.
Wow.
Went to most all the islands. We had soldiers stationed, and we would pick up some and leave some during all that time.
And this was, what year did you say?
I joined there in 1944.
The Merchant Marine.
I joined the Merchant Marine in 44.
So this is during World War II.
In World War II, and I stayed in. I came home and got married, but I went back for a little while until the war ended. And the war ended in August of 45. And so then I came home. And my first son was born in October 24th of that year, so I was home in time for his birth.
You got to be there.
Yeah, I got to be there for his birth.
That's great.
And
so how did you meet my Meemaw? And can you tell us about Meemaw and her name and
well, I can. Her name is Vera Lee Satterwhite was her name. She was a cashier at a drugstore, Skillen's drugstore, at Irving Forest in Dallas, Texas.
Wow. And
back then, drugstores had pharmacies, but they also had a counter for Cokes, sandwiches, a little light.
No.
And so I went in there and got a Coke. And the girl behind the counter, when I started to leave, she said, "I'll pay for that." My wife was the cashier, and when I faced her, she said, "Well, how do you rate?" And I told her, "I think it's because I'm so darn good looking." And she mouthed the words. She didn't say the word, but she mouthed the words, "I hate you." I mean, and was smiling all the time, just like you're a smart aleck. And that was it until I was going with another girl who was her friend that I didn't know at the time. And we wound up over at her house, wife-to-be's house. And first thing you know, they were probably 4 or 5 couples of us, but we weren't so much couples as just a group of kids.
Yeah, you're 17, right?
We were 16 then.
16, not yet.
Actually, 15. I was 15. We were 15 when I met.
Wow.
And we would just, I never was much at dancing, but we would go to her house and we would take turns buying records, vinyl records, and we would just listen to music, and some of them would dance. I didn't care anything about dancing. I did kind of like to hold the girls while they danced, but I never was any good at it. But we enjoyed the music and just palled around like that all the time. Went to play miniature golf and things like that. Just had a good time as kids do.
So if y'all didn't have cars, everyone walks everywhere.
Everyone walked everywhere. I had a bicycle, but generally we just walked everywhere.
Would y'all just kind of meet up and go walk together to where you were going?
Well, and of course, streetcars covered Dallas.
Oh, yeah.
Trolleys, streetcars just covered Dallas. When you were under 12 or under, just cost 3 cents. And then when you were adult or above 12, it was 7 cents.
Yeah.
But you could get a transfer and you could go anywhere. You could keep transferring. In fact, if you wanted to, you could keep transferring and get on back home on the same 7 cents.
Wow. Yeah.
Because they went everywhere.
So did you often have 3 cents or 7 cents, whatever at the time that you needed to, if you wanted to take the streetcar? Yeah,
I always had money for a streetcar.
If you needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
See, when I was 15, I quit school when I was 15. I just quit. I was in a foster home. My dad had, before he was drafted, he lived over in South Dallas. Mm-hmm. And so he asked me if I'd come over and live with them. So I went over and lived with my father and my stepmother. His mother, Mavis, was her name. And I lived with them at the time when I was 15. Mm-hmm. And it was about 6 blocks up to the Skiller's drugstore from there.
Okay.
But we walked walking was great. Mm-hmm. I got a job at Walgreens warehouse. It was about a mile from the house, and I'd walk. I sometimes take a bike, but I'd generally walk because you could walk down a railroad track, and it was a lot shorter than taking the streets.
Yeah.
And so we just walked everywhere.
And that was when you were 15?
When I was 15.
And what age did you say you joined the Merchant Marines?
I was 16.
So you met your wife to be before you joined?
Yes, we were well acquainted. In fact, when I was in the Merchant Marine, this is when we started, because she was the only one that ever wrote me. She would write me, and nobody else did, but she would write me, and of course I would write her. So it's kind of like we got acquainted. And when I came home, we had never dated until I came home on a leave between ships. And we had our first date. And I remember when we got back to her house, and I said to her, "Now I took you out. May I kiss you goodnight?" And she said, "Oh, okay." So we had a little kiss. And it wasn't enough. Then I had to have a little bigger kiss. But I knew right then I was smitten.
You had feelings.
But her folks, her grandmother who lived close by, said, "You're going to marry that boy." She told him that when we were 15. "You're going to marry that guy." "No, that little guy, he's so funny and silly."
That's so sweet. How long were you home on leave for at a time?
A couple of weeks.
So you would go on a date or two, see her a little bit.
Yeah.
And then go back out.
Then I'd hitchhike back. I'd hitchhike from New Orleans to Dallas. Wow. And then hitchhike back. It was no problem. You had a sailor suit. People going to pick you up.
And that's about 500 miles?
It's 500 miles from Dallas to New Orleans.
And you had no problem. You just
No problem. Never was hurt in any way.
And other sailors, they would do the same thing.
Yeah. That's the way we did it. And so when I finally got out, the government made them hold the job you had. So I went back to the warehouse and worked.
The Walgreens.
In Walgreens. Mm-hmm. And then when I turned 18, we'd been married. When Jim was born, we'd been married 9 months and 17 days.
Wow. Y'all hopped straight to it, huh?
Well, yeah.
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 But that's sweet. That's really sweet.
It was okay.
Uncle Jim's told me before that he's a World War II baby. Do you
Yeah, he
consider
was.
him that way?
Yeah, but the war had just ended.
Right when
He was born in 45. The war ended in August that year, 45, and that's when I came back home.
Yeah.
Because the war was over, and I didn't think anything. But when I turned 18, August, I got drafted in the Army.
Right when he was born.
3 weeks after he was born, I got drafted into the Army.
How did that feel?
Terrible. It's terrible. Can you imagine a 3-year-old son, and then you have to leave him?
No.
And so I got on
and your wife, your new wife.
And my wife. And, you know, we were still getting acquainted.
Yeah.
You know, we'd known each other, but when we got married, I wasn't there long and went back. And I came home. We were getting acquainted. And I had no idea, but they drafted me. But because of my previous service, I guess, as a merchant marine and the training, I didn't have to go to basic training, boot camp or whatever and so they just put me to work. After a couple of weeks, they assigned me to Fort Sam Houston to what we call the Separation Center.
And that's in San Antonio,
In
Texas?
San Antonio. And this meant that when men would come in, and sometime 40 or 50 men would arrive on a bus or train and come in, and they wanted to be discharged, separated from the service, discharged. I was in a group of 6 that if they did not have their service records with them, we made out a temporary service record in order that they go ahead and be discharged. And it took about 3 days for them in their, I guess, debriefing or whatever you would call it, from the time they arrived till the time they were actually discharged.
So they stayed there at that center.
They stayed there at that. And
okay. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, backing up just a little bit, about getting drafted, because I saw one of the drafting letters in the documents you shared. And what was that like? Did you just get a letter in the mail? What did you have to do?
The letter started out, greetings from the President of the United States.
And who was the president then?
Harry Truman. So I got a letter, personal letter from Harry Truman.
Wow.
We want you, of all people in the world, we want you in our Army. I knew it was a privilege, but it was a privilege I could have passed up if they'd let me. I was in the Army for 6 months and 13 days.
Did you know it would be 6 months, or did you have any idea
I
how
had
long you'd be
no
there?
idea. I applied for what we call a hardship discharge, and that's when it came through.
Okay.
After.
Okay, because you wanted to get home to your wife and
I
your
wanted
new
to be
son.
home. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got that 6 months and 13 days, which turned out to be a blessing. Because later, when I became a preacher, I had to go to school. And so I got to go to school on the GI Bill. The GI Bill would pay for your schooling 2 years plus your service time. And so I had 2.5 years of schooling.
Because of that 6 months
of college
service.
time.
Okay.
And so I finished in 3 years.
Nice.
I took extra courses.
Got to work.
Yeah.
Really made as much of that as you could.
Right.
Yeah. So you're in the Army, and it's 1945, and you're in San Antonio, Texas, and your wife and your newborn baby are in Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
And the only way you could communicate was through writing?
Yes.
No phones, anything like that?
I don't think we even had the apartment we lived in had one payphone outside in the hall. All the tenants would use that phone.
Wow.
No, but we didn't have phones.
Okay. And you said that Mima Vera, your wife, lived in that 1-bedroom apartment.
In that 1-bedroom apartment. And when I was drafted, her folks, her mother and father, and her little sister, who was 8 years younger than she, lived there with her.
Yeah. What was her name?
Aaliyah Ann.
Aaliyah?
Leva. Leva.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because in some of the letters, I see that you wrote about them. One part you said, how's your mother, Sally? And Leva, Smokey.
My father-in-law nickname was Sally. His name was Satterwhite, but for some reason, people started calling him Sally.
Okay.
So he was just known as Sally.
That just kind of picked up?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned Uncle Boots. I don't know if I wrote that right.
Uncle Boots was my wife's grandfather.
Wife's grandfather.
And they lived next door.
Okay. So they were close by.
Yeah.
So you're writing about how they're getting along. So they're all right there next to each other. So I've got a bunch of letters, and they're all written between 1945 and 1946. And they're pretty much all letters from you to Mima, to Vera.
Yes.
I'm assuming she wrote you back, but was it
I
very
don't
little?
remember that she ever wrote me back. I wrote her. I sit at a desk,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be hours we had nothing to do
Yeah.
until some men would come. And sometime it would be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometime you never knew.
Mm-hmm. You were just
Then
ready.
sometime 1 or 2 men would just straggle in, and we'd have to take care of them. But generally, I just sit there with not a lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just write letters
To Vera.
to Vera.
Anybody else?
I can't remember that I ever wrote anybody else.
One of the letters, this one says Monday, December 10th, 1945. And this is from you to Vera. Dearest sweetheart, how's my little darling today? I hope she is fine. It is pretty cold down here today. My field jacket feels pretty good. Is it cold up there now? I'll bet it is. The wind is blowing pretty strong all night last night and all today. It's about 2 p.m. I get off at 3 p.m., but thought I had better write my sweet little darling. And that's about the tone of all of the letters. You talk to her really sweetly.
Well, I love that girl.
I know.
I really did love that girl. I was amazed that somebody with the class she had, her home wasn't good, much better than that. Her folks stayed together, but they didn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
Her father was an alcoholic, and a bad alcoholic. He could not survive 10 minutes in the morning without a big sip of whiskey.
Yeah, that's bad.
And he would drink at least a pint every day
Of whiskey. Wow. Was whiskey easy to get? I mean, this is far after like Prohibition and everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you could get it in most. There were 2 or 3 parts of Dallas that were dry.
Mm-hmm.
Oak Cliff part of Dallas, which is the western part, was dry. Alcohol wasn't wide open. There weren't any nightclubs where they served. You could buy beer or whiskey, but you couldn't drink it on premises.
I see. It was mostly you just buy and you drink at home.
Yeah,
and that's what people mostly did.
And so he was an alcoholic. He made good money, but he spent it all. You know, a pint or more of whiskey a day is expensive.
Wow.
And not only that, he liked to gamble. I don't mean he went to clubs. It means he would find guys and play dice with them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're drinking, you make stupid bets. So he was always out of money.
Yeah. How much do you think he was betting when he was gambling?
Oh, money's different then
Yeah.
than now.
Well, I ask because in some of the dominoes games that you're talking about in your letters, and you said the men in your tent, y'all would play dominoes, but you'd only bet up to 17 cents a game.
Yeah, that was like penny ante stuff. It just to make the game worth something.
Yeah. So you think his betting was like a
Oh,
little
his betting
higher.
was more, 4 or 5 or 6, maybe $10.
And that's a lot because you told me
It
that
was a lot of money then.
a week's rent was $8.
Our rent week was $8.
Wow. So that's if you're losing that.
And when I worked at the warehouse, I had worked up to about $30 a week.
And you made a little more than that when you were in the Army.
Well, yes and no. I got $50 a month was the pay.
Mm-hmm.
I got 21 of it for me, and they sent the rest of it to her. She got a check every month.
They sent it. It was just done.
It was just done.
Yeah.
Once a month, she got $29.
Wow. Okay.
And once a month, I got $21.
Back to that little part about it's pretty cold down here today. I'm wearing my field jacket. So when I'm reading this, I didn't know what a field jacket
A field jacket was a Army jacket, a little more green than olive stuff that we wore.
Mm-hmm.
And it was of a cloth that was thick and had some padding in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so is that like the typical like Army jacket that you think of? Like
Yeah, it was an Army issue.
Mm-hmm. And it sounded like in one of these letters that I read that you got that from somebody that was coming through, right?
Well, when these guys came back from overseas or what to be discharged, they would often ask us, I've got this and this, what I do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we wanted it, we would say, we'll take it.
Okay.
You're supposed to give it to us.
And they said, okay.
And they said, okay, they'd do anything to get discharged.
Oh, yeah.
And so we got a lot of stuff. I eventually got me an Eisenhower jacket, which was
Wow.
new at the
Wow.
time.
So what's an Eisenhower jacket?
Well, it just goes to the waist.
Okay.
And all of us wore, like a regular, it looked like a suit coat with buttons
Oh,
on it.
that's nice.
But we exchanged the coat for Eisenhower jackets because
Wow.
they snapped at the waist. And
that was really sought
oh,
after.
yeah.
That was a
And
sharp
much
jacket.
much more comfortable.
Were you literally in a tent? You were sleeping in a tent?
The first 2 weeks when we went down there after we were drafted, all of us slept in what they call Tent City.
Mm-hmm.
There were eight guys to a tent.
Mm-hmm.
But after I was assigned there, I was in a barracks. It's a building that has rows of cots.
Mm.
We all slept
In one room.
in one room, except for the sergeant who was in charge, and he had his own room. And then the lieutenant who was in charge he was somewhere else.
Yeah. And what was your position when you were in the Army?
I was private.
Private. You mentioned to me that when you wrote these letters and sent them out, I'm looking at some of the envelopes, you literally wrote free in the corner.
Yeah, back then, and I don't know if it's that way now, where I worked, we had envelopes and paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just get some and write it. And we didn't have to buy stamps. You could just, if you had an Army address, your address was an Army address.
You just write free.
You could just write free, where you put the stamp, you just wrote free.
That's so awesome. It's so simple,
And so, you could send letters as often as you want.
As many as you want.
Yeah, didn't worry about money.
Did you have to buy the paper and
No.
supplies?
No, the paper was there.
Yeah. And so you could write as many as you wanted.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
Yeah, it was available.
I want to show you this envelope because this is a drawing that is on a lot of the envelopes. You see that? What is this?
Kilroy.
It's a little guy on the back of the envelope.
Kilroy. There was just something going on in the Army. And I don't know why, but there was a picture of this guy, and you could see his hand. It's like he's looking over a fence.
Okay.
And you could see his fingers on
the fence.
You're looking at him. He's on the other side. You're looking at him. You can see his fingers.
And that looks like what you drew, too. It's like on the
and his
seal
nose.
of the
And his nose hung over the fence. And everywhere, all the latrines, you could always see things. Kilroy was here.
What does Kilroy mean?
I have no idea. Never did know.
But it's on all these envelopes, so it was just something going on that
it was just there.
You wrote on there Guardians of Victory. Do you remember what that
No,
meant?
I have no idea what that was.
Well, that's cool. And it's really neat because it really makes
And I remember one time we had prisoners of war, Germans, prisoners of war, and they were our janitors.
Oh.
They cleaned up the place.
Really?
They were treated well. Boy, they had a good life, better than they ever had it, and they were happy with it. And I can remember one of them asked me, "Who is this Kilroy?"
Someone one of them asked you that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I had no idea who he was.
A German prisoner of war.
Yeah.
So he's seeing this stuff
Yeah.
too. So it really was everywhere.
It was everywhere. It was all through all the Army. I don't know who started it or why.
I'm going to have to look that up. You're also talking about in some of these letters, we've got a new first sergeant and he's chickenish. So is the captain that signs over the passes. The other first sergeant and captain got just discharged. Lester will be discharged Thursday.
I remember the captain he had a lot of swagger. He carried a kind of a whip or something that he kept slapping his leg as he walked along. Just
interesting.
A quirt of some kind.
Huh.
And
to be like intimidating or something?
I have no idea.
But he just did it.
We just saw him. He never showed up for anything but we just knew he was over the whole outfit that we were in.
Yeah. Okay. And so you were also under Buckley, right?
Yeah. The second lieutenant who was in charge of the six of us was William F. Buckley. His father was ambassador to Ireland.
Wow.
And William F. Buckley became a leading figure in politics during the 50s and 60s. He was the ultimate conservative.
Yeah.
Or we would say Republican.
Yeah.
The Democrat politics are so different back then than they
Mm-hmm.
are now. It wasn't all the hatred and everything. It was
Mhm.
just, here's the way I believe. No, here's the way I believe.
Yeah.
He had a magazine that he published, and it was all about conservatism,
So did you interact with him personally
just in the Army.
frequently
I
in
mean,
the Army?
he would sign my passes and all.
Oh, so
He was in the
pretty
room all the
frequent.
time. I mean, he was with us.
Wow. And when you say sign passes, you mean passes to leave?
Yeah, we would to go say after the first 3 weeks I was there. The guys I worked with, we had hours,
Mhm.
my hours, 2 at a time. I would work overtime for some of their hours.
Mhm.
Then on the weekend, I would get them to work for me,
Mhm.
and I would get a 3-day pass, and I would hitchhike to Dallas
Yeah.
to see my wife and kid.
Yeah. Hitchhiking again.
And
And,
then
it was
hitchhike.
pretty normal
I
again.
can't tell you how many times
Yeah.
I hitchhiked from Dallas to San Antonio and back.
What were the people like that picked you up? All kinds of people?
All kinds. I got in the car one time with a guy who was so drunk, I just knew he was going to get us killed.
Oh, no.
But I mean, he
Wow.
would be going along 45 or 50 and just suddenly slow down to 20 and then wake up and I'd call his, hey, bud. And he would wake up and speed up again. It was
Wow.
terrifying.
Wow.
I've been in cars with families where they just barely made room for me.
Shove
And,
you in there.
Just you name it. Sometime a pickup truck, sometime a big freight truck.
Yeah. So
Just
times
to-
were a lot different because now hitchhiking, it's
I
just
can- I can-
of scary
Anytime I
things.
went out on the highway, I would not be there 10 minutes.
Wow, that's wild. Did you ever have to offer any money for a ride, or did
Never,
people just
never
pick you
did,
up?
never did. In fact, I've had them stop and eat and buy my lunch.
Wow. So people were generally pretty, grateful for the
Right,
service and wanted
right,
to help out.
right.
That's good. I saw that you had applied for a pass one weekend, and there's a letter where you're apologizing to Vera. Honey, I just miss you, and I'm so sorry this didn't work out this weekend. I know you were disappointed. Do you remember that weekend? It sounded like you didn't get a pass, and you had
We
wanted.
probably had a bunch of men.
Mm-hmm.
Either they came in or they expected they would come in.
Yeah.
And so Lieutenant Buckley would say, no, we need you. We need you this weekend.
You can't go. Did that happen a lot?
Occasionally.
Yeah, sometimes.
Mhm.
So she never really knew for sure that you'd be
No.
going home. Yeah. And then what was it like when you were home for that weekend?
Oh, it was delightful.
Yeah.
Just playing with Jim and enjoying. I enjoyed her family. We all got along great.
Good.
Her father and I were great, great friends.
Mm-hmm.
He loved baseball like I love baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did talk baseball and we just got along great,
That's
just
really
famously.
sweet.
There was no problem at all. My mother-in-law was a very sweet lady too. It was just one big happy family.
Mm-hmm. That's really sweet. And then it was hard for you to go back home
Hmm.
or go back to the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this happened when I got my discharged.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't tell them that I was getting a discharge. When it came, it was a surprise to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just took the group of men that came in and I just led them around
Mm-hmm.
because I was being discharged too. And then
Mm-hmm.
got my duffel bag full of stuff and got on this time I bought a bus ticket.
You got a bus ticket.
Got a bus ticket.
Why'd you get a bus ticket?
When you discharged, they gave you $300.
Oh, wow.
So
You
I had,
splurged, huh?
I mean, I'd never had that much money in my life. I didn't know there was that much money in the world. I knew
Wow.
banks had some, but
They handed it to you before you left.
yeah.
Wow.
So I got a bus ticket, got home, got my duffel bag, and I didn't tell them I was discharged. They thought I was just there on leave.
Oh, a surprise.
Until after a couple hours, I said, I got something I want to show you.
Mhm.
And I got out my discharge and showed it to Vera, and she said, what is this? I said, it's my discharge. I'm home. God, was she happy.
Did she cry?
Yeah,
I'm about to cry.
Yeah. yeah.
That's so sweet.
That was a wonderful time.
You got to be home with your wife and your baby, and you went back to your warehouse job.
Went back to my warehouse job.
Yeah. And when you were in the Army, it was in Fort Sam Houston that you got to meet Eisenhower?
Yes. I guess it was Buckley that knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And so no. The guy in charge of Fort Sam Houston, and this might not mean anybody except old people who remember, was a general by the name of Wainwright.
Mm-hmm.
Skinny Wainwright.
Mm-hmm.
He had been in charge of the battalion in the Philippines that had been captured by the Japanese
Wow.
for years. And when he was released, he came back. He was in charge of Fort Sam Houston. And so General Eisenhower came down through there, and he went through our office.
Mm-hmm.
And we saluted him, and he shook hands with each of us and just had a word to speak to each of us, like maybe, where's your home, or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Some small talk.
Boy, that was such a thrill.
That was exciting.
Because Eisenhower was bigger than life.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
really
he was in charge of the
big.
whole European operation.
Wow.
And he was just a hero like you just couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
He was the first 5-star general. 4 was the big number
Mm-hmm.
until he came along. And because he was over everything, they gave him an extra star.
Wow.
And I'll never forget.
And so Eisenhower was in charge of the European side, and so he led the force of D-Day.
D-Day. He was in charge of all of that.
Which was the invasion of France.
Right. He was in charge of the English, French, everybody involved. He was in charge.
Because it was a coordinated effort
Yes.
between the
Yeah.
British and
Mostly the
US.
British and the U.S.
but
the French had an underground
Mhm.
that they stayed in touch with, and so they were involved.
Wow. And you got to meet him.
Yeah, I
and
did.
you shook his hand.
I did. One of the thrills of my life.
It's a piece of history.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's the end of the part 1 Bill Parr interview, covering a lot of ground from his experience in foster care, the Merchant Marines, the Army, meeting Eisenhower, getting married, having his first son, and coming up more about the second part of Peepaw's life, launching his career, his thoughts on some political events, including the atomic bomb, and just some really interesting things. And I can't wait for you all to hear. Bye.